Hi there, Union fans. Welcome to episode 1 of Brotherly Game Breakdown. That's what we're going to call this for now. Us at Philadelphia Soccer Now, we want to give you guys a little bit more long-form video content. And after I missed the Toronto game and the Columbus game, I was caught up in some other things. We figured what better time to start than now. Those two games, no takeaways video, but those are more frustrating games. I don't want to sound too repetitive here, kind of parroting the same talking points after every match. But we kind of wanted to do something different for this week. So I put out a couple posts on social media, on Twitter and on Blue Sky. And I just wanted to thank you guys for getting involved with that. A lot of cool interactions there. And just kind of break that down on camera for you guys today. So I'm going to do that in the middle of this video. And first, we're going to talk about some takeaways from the Toronto game and from the Nashville game. So starting with the Toronto game, which was last Wednesday, just brutal ending in a 3-3 draw on the road. But let's talk about the whole game as a whole. A lot of positives and negatives to take away from this one, some more important than others. But I want to start with that first goal that we saw the Union dig the ball out of the midfield. Jovan Lukic gets on the loose ball and he plays in Milanolowski. And I am a big fan of Milanolowski. I think anyone I've talked to around the team knows this. But this is kind of a dilemma. Olowski is kind of a dilemma in the Union system right now, given that he plays centrally. He plays as a wide attacking midfielder in that 4-2-2 on the wings. Olowski is the Union's best finisher, but he's also the Union's best creator. And I think that kind of causes this dilemma where when he's at the 10, he's sending balls into forwards that aren't confident and the Union can't get a final touch on the ball. And then when he's at striker, that creativity that the team is supplying him actually goes down. And, we saw last year, we saw both sides of Milanolowski. In San Diego, in MLS, he was used as a winger in a front three and sometimes as a striker off the bench. And he was just so clinical. He's a finisher. He's deadly in front of goal. But he can also do some of that creative work when asked to. In only 12 league games for the Union last season, he had 5 assists. That's not nothing. That's very high levels of creativity that the Union are lacking this year. While Olowski's tied with the team lead with Danley for goals this season, he actually leads the team in chances created and expected assists, which is, it's impressive, but it does leave you with this selection conundrum of what do you do? Do you keep creating for Damiani and Alado until it goes in, or do you play him at striker and let him be a lethal finisher? And in this game, Olowski was a striker. He gets his chance and he puts it away. It's really good for 1-0. For 2-0, I don't want to go too much into 2-0, and honestly, even 3-2 for the Union. It was a very fortunate goal. Good for Danley for keeping up with the press, but oh my gosh, you've never seen anything like that before. But when it comes to the Union this season, they blow a lead. They don't really have the experience to put that game away. And then you concede to a keeper to draw. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I'm going to get more into that later in this show when we go into the Columbus game as well. So the Columbus game came after. This was last Saturday. And they concede early and to Max Arfston on a mistake from Philippe Ndinga. And once again, stoppage time comes, almost just trying to get to halftime. They concede again in a Nate Harrell own goal. And I think this is the main theme with this team this year. This is what I've been seeing, because I don't feel like this team is second to last in the league bad. I think they're struggling, but I don't think they're like terrible. I don't think they're a stellar team in MLS. I just think so much of this boils down to maturity, to experience in game management. Just they don't have that in this team. The intangibles, playing with a lead, playing in stoppage time, getting to the half, closing out games, discipline. Early in the year, the discipline issues. All this costs the Union points. And I just think if you look at some predictive metrics that you can use to analyze soccer, one of them is XG difference. The Union are middle of the pack in XG difference. They're not anywhere close to Kansas City, who they only have a 1-point lead on at MLS this year. So while I think there's some positives you can take from that, I still think this team is pretty far from being ready. And we talked about that online. You guys sent me a lot of really interesting posts and thoughts and analysis, and I thank you guys for that. And this is the part where I get to play WIP radio host, and I get to hear what you guys have to say about the Union. and give you my knowledge and insight into it. Earlier this week, I asked you guys on Twitter and Blue Sky, Union fans, in your eyes, what are the main reasons for the way 2026 has gone? Is it the front office, Carnell, new signings, the tactics, the strikers? Just trying to collect your opinions for this. Please let me know in the replies and share if you feel inclined. And you guys knocked it out of the park on this. I saw a lot more engagement than we've been seeing from the Union fan base, and props to you guys for that. Getting into these replies, let's start here with Rich Els. Rich says, it is, without a shred of doubt, the lack of distribution at the attacking midfielder position. You have a bunch of finishers who cannot get service from other finishers. This team is above the line with room to spare, with Borek Dachkow's assists and skill set where Indy is starting. Okay, I get this. And one thing I've seen from Union fans this year a lot, and honestly from my own eyes watching these games, is yeah, they are kind of missing an assist guy. I feel like it's pretty clear. But Milanowski does a good job at that. And Frankie Westfield gets up and down the wings really well and supplies a lot of really good service into the box. It's just that's not always cashed in for one reason or another. And one thing I've also kind of noticed is not to dunk on these poor strikers even more, but these strikers, Alado and Damiani, they have size, but they don't win a ton of headers in the box facing the goal. They're very good at hold-up play, though. And I think this kind of leads to this problem where the strikers are kind of showing with their back to goal to be an option, but when that ball goes down the wing, are they in the box? Are they ready for a cross? Often not. But I do get this, and I think that the creativity, whether it's a guy that can run at a defender, whether it's a guy that can put a ball on a plate, whether it's a guy that can hit the line and square it on the ground, the Union are missing that. But let me ask you, does that sound like anyone? I mean, this team just misses Quinn Sullivan so much. I know he's getting closer. I can tell you I've seen him training and running around at the Wisfa Bank complex, so hopefully that's sooner and rather than later. No Pro Rel for MLS says they sold a striker to DC United instead of making him a DP. They had nobody in the pipeline for Wagner, knowing he wanted something in Europe, prioritizing kids from abroad instead of kids from the academy. Quinn Sullivan injury hard to overcome. All the players they signed needed to start as backups and earn minutes. And I think there's a lot of really, really good points here. So one of them, we're going to start with Ty Baribo. So Ty Baribo, I'm honestly getting tired of talking about it. I'm sure you guys are getting tired of talking about it. But this past season, the Union let go Ty Baribo and they let go Jacob Glesnes. And those are the two big ones within MLS. Kai Wagner is, in my opinion, is its own separate dilemma. And what I'll say about Kai Wagner, because this is going to come up a million times in the comments today, is this might sound crazy, but Union fans, you got to let it go, man. You got to let it go. He was a top level MLS player. He became a player that was too good for MLS. It is great that the Union had Kai Wagner. It was a privilege to watch him play as long as he did in Philly. But the guy wanted to go. And at the end of the day, if you want to sign players that could develop into stars, doing right by the player looks good for your organization. Not only does it look good for your organization, it could help with that future recruitment, but it's also just kind of a fact of being an MLS team, you know? So if you have a player that comes to MLS, you have a striker that scores 30 goals a year and he's 22, he's going to move to a league in Europe. It's just what happens. You know, you can offer him a DP contract, but, you know, these players, these young players, especially if it's a player like Kai Wagner, who's coming from Europe, they're going to want to go back and test their ambition and see what levels they can reach in their game. That doesn't surprise me. It's going to happen. So, you know, Kai was great when he was here. He wanted to move on. I don't blame him for that. Baribo and Glesnes are two separate cases. And what I'll say is this. Jacob Glesnes was incredible in 2022. It was one of the better center back seasons I think I've seen in MLS, given that Jim Curtin's team, recovering the ball in the counters, they would push up very high, and Jacob Glesnes would put out fires back there. Glesnes and Elliott, the two of them in the middle, Wagner would push way up. These guys would put out fires with balls over the top. They were always defending. They were always running. That is not an easy position to play. So I'm glad Glesnes got his recognition for that. 2023 was not as good, and 2024 was a total train wreck. So given that 2025 season in the context of 24, I saw Jacob become more confident. I didn't see him get all the way back to that levels. And that's not to say he wasn't a good MLS center back. He was. I'm not sure he deserved to be in that Defender of the Year finalist conversation, though. He got pulled out of position much more due to, I think, the nature of this Carnell team, which, Jim Curtin's team likes to press you when you're attacking, turn the ball over, and break. Bradley Carnell's team likes to win the ball in the attacking third. And, that's an even more aggressive style of play than what we had under Jim Curtin. And, Gleznes at times, struggled. And I don't know if that's what a Jacob Gleznes problem or if that's a system problem, but he was taking yellow cards left and right. And they decided it was time to kind of cash in on Jacob Gleznes. And this, might have been a shock at the time, but I kind of understand, given the context of 2025, that the front office felt they could improve on it. But I'm going to come back to this. Baribo it's funny how we look at Ty Baribo now, being this guy, the one that got away, they didn't want to sign him as a DP contract. But when Ty Baribo was here for the first 11 months, it was like a total joke. Like he was essentially like the Mate Orovec, like sexy season signing, given that Jim Curtin just didn't want to play him. He was available. He wasn't injured. And he sat and he sat and he sat. And then that Leagues Cup run happens. He gets form. And, the rest is history. He has that great 2025 season where, especially that first half, he starts on fire. He plays in the All-Star game. He wins the All-Star game MVP. That's a pretty cool thing. Second half of the year, maybe not as consistent, but at the end of the day, the Union decide that his style is not exactly what they want, and they want to move him on. So this kind of cashing in on a player that might not be exactly what they want to do is not new to the Union. It was exactly what happened with Daniel Gazdag under Bradley Carnell. This is a player that was signed before Carnell was playing 4-2-2. Gazdag is not a guy who's going to be a wide 10. It wasn't going to work. He's not really a striker in a 4-2-2 situation either. So I understood that at the time. I was like, okay, stylistically, it doesn't work. And if that was the plan with Baribo, I get it. My issue with these sales does not come from the sales itself. It is, like since 2010 mentions here, these players that they signed, they needed to start as backups. And this is crucial. This is crucial here. And I'm going to focus on these three new signings that take these positions, which is at center back, it's Japhet Seri. At left back, it's Felipe Ndinga. And at striker, it's Ezekiel Alado. We're going to start with the center back, Japhet Seri. He's 26 years of age, right? But you have to remember, you have to take this with a grain of salt, right? He was on some very good teams in, Norway. Took him a long time to break into. And Norway and Denmark, sorry. It was tough for him to break in. He's had some injury struggles as well. Japhet Seri has played 99 senior league matches. Nate Harriel has played 119 senior league matches. And this is a guy that we kind of talk about as like a young dude who's kind of still gaining experience. And I get that Japhet has that Europa League experience under his belt. That's crucial. But for some of these young guys, they need a veteran to gel. And, Japhet's got to gel as well. He's new to the U.S. I really like what I've seen from him, like with his passing ability, his skill. I think he's still kind of learning the system. But I think Japhet's a great player. And it's just kind of feels like the team is looking at him at 26 and it's like, okay, this is going to be one of our veteran leaders. And I just don't know if that's a great call. Moving into the next two, which is Alado and Ndinga. These guys were signed from Sweden. And what I'll say is, the Union clearly feel like they've identified a market deficiency or inefficiency in that region. They want to buy players from that region. They want to buy young, up-and-coming players from that region. So to replace Ty Baribo, the Union go with 20-year-old Ezekiel Alado, who was playing in Ghana. He goes to Bromopoy Karna the year before. He plays one season, and the Union sign him. So the extent of his senior football outside of the Union in Europe is one season. Moving on to Felipe Ndinga as well. Felipe Ndinga at left back. He's a right-footed left back to replace Kai Wagner. He was on a B team in France. He plays one senior match in France before transferring to Degerfors, where he plays 11 matches and then signs for the Union. These players, they're young and they should be viewed in the organization as projects, but they're not, because there's such a need for the team at left back and there's such a need in the team for a striker. These players with not much experience have kind of been thrown in there, which is why it kind of makes me a little sad to kind of see some of the comments about Alado, and especially about Ndinga, who has even less senior experience, which is that some of these guys could have really benefited from a little bit more time to just gel. And especially with Felipe Ndinga, I think a lot about Owatu Makanya, which Owatu Makanya signed from South Africa, signed from Stellenbosch. He comes in and he plays Union 2 for a year and a half plus. And when Makanya finally gets that call to the senior level, he looks great. And he's only 21. And it makes you wonder whether these guys have kind of been fast-tracked when they didn't need to be, or they shouldn't have been. I do feel for these guys. I think the team could have done a lot better giving these guys more time to gel. And in my eyes, I see a Felipe Ndinga signing. And I see an Ezekiel Alado signing. And I see these guys are projects. They're projects. They're young players. They don't have a lot of experience. It's going to take time. My issue with this is that these players that they replaced, Glesnes, Wagner, and Baribo, both had much more experience than these players. And I think back to, when Glesnes first came here, and when Wagner first came here, they had Elliott, which was a guy that was around for a while. They had Blake at the back, a guy that was around for a while. And I look at this team and I'm thinking, these guys, who do they have to kind of help them besides Andre Blake, besides Ali Bedoya, who's not really going to be a main contributing factor in the 11 this year? At least I hope not. But there's not as many guys that have been on the Union, that have been in MLS for years before this to kind of help that transition, And I think that has definitely affected the acclimation of these players. And, I do think it's foolish to kind of throw these guys in and expect instant results. But at the same time, I do hope that this situation that they're in, which is kind of the product of the front office, isn't thrown at these players and this doesn't become their career, because they are young. Their whole career is ahead of them. So try to remember that. All right, moving on. Port Richmond Pat says, laughing, crying faces, ownership is a joke. Now, this is kind of the one that I was expecting to hear the most, was about the ownership. And yeah, the Union could spend a lot more. This is common knowledge. We've talked about this. The dead horse has been beat countless times. One thing I want to bring up earlier this year is our friend Matt Doyle posted on Blue Sky back in March, the Union are terrible and fans should be furious about how that club is run. Of course, this is after they let go those big three names that we talked about earlier. So I'm going to kind of not be devil's advocate here, but I'm a big fan of, when we're talking about sports, when we're talking about soccer, you have to look at the whole picture. And just because an explanation for something is easy, that doesn't mean that it's correct. So the Union are just coming off this window where they make the playoffs, I believe 8 out of 9 seasons. They're consistently relevant. They're deep in CCC. And they assembled a team in 2022 that was good enough to win MLS Cup. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend and say things like that team wasn't good enough to win, because they didn't. That final was decided by penalty kicks. It was anybody's game. It was in LA because of Wynn's tiebreaker. So in that span of all that success, this Union ownership was still the same ownership group. And I know that people are going to hear this and kind of get really upset at me for saying it, but it's true. The Union in the past have succeeded with this ownership group, with this level of spending. Now, there's a couple of ways to look at what's happened in the years since 2022, whether it's The Union is selling their players to turn a profit, reinvesting that into younger players and hoping they hit. Sometimes they hit and sometimes they don't. And this year, maybe they didn't. But I have a little bit more to say about spending. The Union are kind of notorious for making these kind of diamond in the rough, no one's ever heard of this guy, like TAM level signings. But I say TAM level for a reason, because when you look at the top most expensive record transfers in the Union's history, it probably isn't what you think it is. So I'm going to give you from 12 to 1 the Union's most expensive 12 transfers of all time. So number 12 was the notorious Mate Oravec, the sexy season guy, who I don't believe he ever played a game for the Union. Number 11 was David Akam. You didn't get that money back. Number 10 was Stanley Jean-Jacques, who's been a success. 9, Ty Baribo, who was a success. They were able to make that money back as well as get those goals from Ty. Number 8 was Daniel Gazdag, your club's all-time record goal scorer. Number 7 is Japhet Sari-Larson. Jury's still out. Number 6, Jamiro Montero. He was good, but he wasn't as great as maybe a DP level 8/10 that you would like. Number 5 is Philippe Ndinga. We have yet to see enough out of him. Number 4, Agustin Anello, who has been injured this year. We haven't seen much out of him. Number 3 is Michael Ua, who they let his contract run out. He was not sold. There was not enough interest to sell him. He was on and off, inconsistent for the Union. Bruno Damiani is your number 2, 0 goals this season, and number 1 is Ezekiel Alado. So those right there are your 12 most expensive transfers in Union history. I always look at this list and I see some of the names that are in and around it, and it's so fascinating to me because when the Union do choose to spend, and I say spend because these fees are not as high as spending on a DP would be to other teams. But it's very perplexing because when the Union do cash out on a 10 or a forward, it's more often than not really working for them. Especially, I look at this Michael Ua deal, and I go back and forth with people all the time on this Michael Ua deal. Michael, he was a great team player. He hustled. He stretched the field. He made plays in behind. I hear people say about Bruno Damiani this season, he's holding the ball up. He's doing the dirty work. In my opinion, if you are going to be a designated player in this league, if you're going to be one of the highest paid players on a team, if you are going to occupy those premium roster spots and you're an attacker, you need to provide quality to the team. If the Union are looking for a guy to stretch the field, go get Laurie Goddard from Hofstra. If you're looking for a guy that can hold the ball up, knock it back, do the dirty work, get Nanzo Adimabua from Cal. These are stuff that NCAA level strikers can do in a team. I'm serious. And, it hasn't happened like that when they make these more expensive signings. And I say more expensive because I wrestle with this all the time when you have guys like Ezekiel Alado, where that's like $4.5 million deal. I feel like that's a perfectly reasonable fee to pay for a guy who has high level potential, who's scouted by Premier League teams, who's a project. But this is their club record signing. They just haven't really gone up there enough. But with this front office, if when Ernst Tanner returns, are you not a little worried about like what would happen if they do just start spending given this track record? I know I would be, but it's neither here nor there. Either way, my biggest thing right now with ownership and my biggest thing with the front office is if you are going to sell to your fans that you're competing, that you're aiming for a title, the least you can do is fill those premium roster spots. Whether it's the U22 spots, the 2 U22 and the 3 DPs, or you take the 2 DPs and the 4 U22 spots. And so far this season, the Union have an open DP spot, and they are in last place in the East. And for me, I struggle to believe that ownership and the front office can say, we're going for titles, we're competing, we want to go far in Conca Champions this year, we think this is our year, when those spots are not filled. So this summer, I would hope, and I would hold the front office to the standard of getting that job done. And hopefully ownership will be willing to pay for that. That said, when it comes to ownership, Jay Sugarman will sell this team when he wants to sell this team. It's going to be hard to force him out. And I don't really see a massive increase in payroll until that happens. All in all, with ownership, I do agree that, the union could be doing a lot better, and they have to work harder to retain their players, and they have to spend a little bit more. And until that happens, I think fans have every right to question ownership. If they are going into crucial games, if they're going into CONCACAF with one DP whose salary is buy down eligible, so basically zero DPs, it's a very hard sell to me that you can tell your fans that you're competing, that you're doing everything you can to put a competitive team out in the field. I can't buy that. Next up, from Ben Brecher. In my opinion, the biggest problem for the union in 2026 is the replacement signings. The union have missed on almost all of them so far. Kai is hard to replace. We talked about that. I get that, but it feels like Ndinga does not fit the system. The lack of signing a quality number 10 is also up there. Yeah, and I've seen a lot about, chance creation and the 10, but the 10 is such a strange position to talk about with this current roster construction. Let me tell you why. First, we talked about Olaski earlier. Is he a 10? Is he a striker? Where is his best position in this system, right? Number 2, you have Indy Vasilev, who is a great workhorse, ball retention guy, not known for the cutting edge in the final third. Okay, sure. Next, you have both Sullivans, which are both really complicated things to talk about right now. So Kevin is in and out of the team. He's starting. He's on the bench. He plays a half. I know a lot of people are up in arms about this, given that he has that creativity, that cutting edge maybe that some other players on this team are lacking. I want to remind you guys he's 16. I also think that a lot of this is not based on anything I've heard from behind the scenes, but what I would assume is that Man City want Kevin Sullivan to kind of stay healthy. And these days in soccer, we see these young players play 90 minutes twice a week, 4 times in a 2-week span, and they want to take care of him. So if that's the case, then so be it. But if this is, tactically driven at this point, I think I'd like to see him a little bit more. And then you have Quinn, who's just waiting to come back. He's the player they need. He's creativity. He's power, pace. He's finishing. And they just don't have him. He's hurt. So I do wonder what the solution for this is, whether it's waited out for either Sullivan, whether it's cash out on a DP10, whether it's this summer, is that DP signing going to be a striker, a 6, a center back? I don't know. But I get your complaints here. I understand what you're saying. All right, Mike Barrera says, starts with the front office. The signings this offseason, including Damiani last year, haven't been good enough. Carnell was set up for failure. I do believe he needs to get away from the 4-2-2-2. But these players just aren't good enough. And yeah, I tend to agree with this between the signings and between everything that's gone on with Ernst Tanner, which I am going to talk about that. When you are an executive at a soccer club, it is your job to sign players, sure. It is also your job to make hires. It is your job to run a team, hold meetings in the office, whatever. There's more that goes into it than talent ID, than signing players. At this point, if all of this is going on, this is the environment you're creating, I don't know if signing players makes you good at your job. You have other responsibilities here, and there's a lot that goes into this. There's a lot more than signing players. That said, at this point, Ernst Tanner is suspended, and he's on track to come back on June 1st. Whether the union keep him or not, I don't know. But I can tell you my thoughts are that I hope that they turn the page and they bring in somebody new ideas, maybe from outside the organization, and, start fresh. I don't know if I agree with Mike here. It's really hard to blame Bradley Carnell, and I know it's very, very easy to look at St. Louis and say, oh, Bradley Carnell, year 2 regression, that's exactly what's happening here. I think that's such a surface level way to look at things. And I sympathize with Bradley Carnell a little bit, considering when he was at St. Louis, he had to deal with Lutz Pfannenstiel. And Lutz Pfannenstiel, this season after Bradley Carnell was fired, also gets fired because he tries to take full reign of the team. He tries to take full reign of sporting decisions, and it crashed and burned in St. Louis. So they got him out, and they're rebuilding now. Bradley Carnell comes to the Union, and he takes a not playoff qualifying Jim Curtin team from 2024, and he wins the Supporters Shield without many new signings, honestly. Makanya and Baribo were the breakout players, and they were all here the year before. They just weren't really getting as many league opportunities. So I give Bradley Carnell a lot of credit for that, and it sucks that when he was at St. Louis in year 2, Lutz was taking over, and now in Philly in year 2, all this Ernst Tanner stuff happens right when he's starting his playoffs. His most solid starters get sold, and then he has to answer every week in the press conferences for it. So I do feel for Bradley a little bit. And yeah, I just feel like a lot of these players aren't ready. I just don't know if it's their fault. The roster construction here is just really questionable. Ivory says, signings-wise, guys either don't fit the profile, and Dinga's very similar to Kai, are too similar, Alado and Bruno, or it's unclear their best position, Agustin and Nello. Coaching-wise, the fundamentals have collapsed, pressing cues plus structure is never in sync, and Carnell plays guys out of position. Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts about this, one being Ndinga being different from Kai, and I understand that, being the guy that comes after Kai Wagner was always going to be difficult. But one of the things that I've felt this whole time is just because your last left back was a creator doesn't mean your next left back has to be a creator. And I think that Frankie Westfield has done a good job, helping with creativity both on the left and right side when he's played this year. I don't think that makes necessarily Philippe Ndinga a bad signing because he's a more defensive-minded guy. That's just how he plays. I think he's been a little rough to start this season, but like I said earlier, it's the acclimation period we talked about. He's kind of been thrown right in. It's hard to blame him. He is not a very experienced player. When it comes to Alado and Bruno, something I've noticed is Bruno is going to be your back-to-goal guy, right? And I think what the plan has been for Alado is to make those runs in behind. He's very fast when he gets going. I know he hasn't had the ball much this year, so it's hard to tell on TV, but I've seen it. And it often seems to me like Alado is dropping deep for the ball with Damiani. So when that ball comes over the top, he's closer to the midfielders than he is to playing on the shoulder on the line of the back four. So that ball goes over the top, and it's always a center back that's closest to it. And I don't know if this is his tactical instructions or if he's off and he's late because he's learning the system or he doesn't understand tactically what's going on. I'm unsure. I don't really know. I know it's the coach's job to prepare the players, but that has been lacking this year. And I don't think it's because they're similar mold players, because I've seen the speed from Alado. I think it's just it hasn't been working for them. The timing's been all off. One thing I'll say about the pressing is that it's kind of hard to diagnose because I have watched the games and I've seen them kind of fall apart in shape at times. And it's ugly when it happens. That Montreal goal that they conceded, it's ugly. It's two guys running a goal with one defender. But when you look at the numbers, the Union are 5th in the league in winning the ball in the attacking third. To me, what that means is they are winning the ball high. Still, they are. But the attacking transitions are so broken and out of whack with all the change of players that it's not showing. I can think of countless times, I know that Chicago game had a handful of them, where the Union turned the ball over and it's just a shanked pass or it gets wide and it's a cross straight into a defender. And I think that also makes your defense in turn look worse because you're defending more often if you turn the ball over faster. And I think if the Union press high, they force a turnover and they can't make it into anything, then they're going to have to defend more and more and more and more. And I think that's just been a compounding issue as the season goes on. And here Ryan says, front office favors earning a profit over winning. They have to hit on every new player or there is no transition. Bradley seems completely confused on how to play anyone or a preferred starting 11. I'd rather us play the kids and probably be better off. Commit to your philosophy. I hear this and I see this and I get this. And I'm just going to mention here, if you replied and you don't see your post here, I'm reading everything. I'm seeing everything. I'm kind of lumping your ideas in with everybody else. I'm trying to respond to everything here. Yeah, they do really favor earning a profit. And at the same time, that is kind of incongruous with the whole academy setup, being that if the easiest way to, make profit on the transfer market is to develop your young players into stars. And of course that only happens so often. But I understand the frustration of the fans, being that Vasilev hasn't been sharp enough in the final third, and you have Kevin Sullivan, and Aldo has no goals. Maybe we see Malik Jakubovic. Again, I don't think it would have killed the Union to give Aldo some time down in Union 2. I know it's a big fee, but he's a young player. He's an inexperienced player. I get what you're saying here. They have a lot of young talent. Neil Pierre's over in Denmark now. I don't think that's terrible for him, but I understand wanting to see the kids. Yeah, but at the same time, I look at this team. I know Quinn Sullivan's going to come back, and he's going to be crucial. I see Nate Harriel. I see Frankie Westfield. The Union, they're still the Union. It's just, 3 academy players in the starting lineup on and off is still pretty good. So it's just a matter of, when are these guys that they brought in, when are they going to hit the bench? And I also want to remind you guys that this is a really young team. Even the players that they signed are really young. They're 20 years old. So these guys are also projects. And it's also part of the Union philosophy that these guys are young. They're developing talent, whether it comes from their own pipeline or not. And, they've leaned into that really hard. I almost think maybe some more experience would be helpful. But yeah, I'd love to see more of Kevin and Malik as well. It's just more about, balancing those reps, because I'm sure that the Union don't want to give up on Damiani and Aldo too soon. Moving over to Blue Sky, let's start with Jared Kram, who says, I think it's a combination of ownership and the sporting director. Ernst Tanner needs to be fired. He doesn't deserve to stay, and he's a distraction. We also need a new ownership, because it's clear Sugarman will never be willing to support the moves needed to get over the hump. And yeah, I know some of this is a little repetitive, but all in all, I think I agree with this. It feels strange to bring Ernst Tanner back after this. I'm not sure what's going to happen yet. I'm not any more in the know than you guys are on this. This isn't something that's talked about a lot. I know people like John Shear a lot within the organization, but to me, I read those, those accusations, and there's a suspension, which makes me think some of these things were verified by the MLS investigation. What exactly, we don't really know, but I think a restart is probably best for the team at this point. It was a great era, and we can say thank you, Ernst Tanner, for that, but while also acknowledging it might be time to move on. And when it comes to Jay Sugarman, I also, I look at the level of investment in these designated players. I think a lot about the Union buying and selling players, and I always think, as I see them buy Ty Baribo for $1.5 million and sell for $4.5 million, buy Aldo for $4.5 million, and then I guess the idea would be sell for even more than that. And one of the things I think of is, just because you want to develop players to sell, that does not mean you don't have to spend. I look at the U22 initiative, and what I always think of the U22 initiative is, and I know Atlanta aren't exactly amazing right now, but I think of like the old Atlanta United. For your U22 spot, you go down to South America, you get an expensive 10 million-ish, 15 if you want, ballpark, creative young player, and let him develop, give him the keys to your attack. But that's not really how the Union have operated. And it's a head scratcher, because you can spend that money, and if that player develops into the player you think he can be, then you can make that back on a sale. And I get it's risky, but it's not dead money. So that is a gripe that I have. And if Sugarman stays, if Sugarman goes, I would like to see more of this in the future, because the quality of the league's improving. And while I think the Union have showed that you don't necessarily need that to have success in this league, I think it would be nice to see. So let's see it one of these days. And here we got a great response from Silver Ray. We got a whole thread here. Let's go through it together. It starts with Tanner's actions resulting in his suspension. Front office yeeted 4 veterans, 3 MLS All-Stars, did not hit on any of their main targets. The players they bring in don't know the system, and other than Sari are all kids. None of them have acclimated. You are nowhere close to energy drink soccer. Bradley only knows energy drink soccer. There's no plan B or tactical adjustment available. stuck trying to coach up half the team and not succeeding. Two of our strikers are clones. Neither one will ever score double digits in a Union jersey. The only real striker has been stuck in midfield, Milanowski. None of our 26 homegrown crop have leveled up yet. We are sorely missing Quadzilla on the field. The fact that Bedoya is leading the Union in assists on 156 minutes says a lot about the current state of affairs on the effectiveness of the starting 11 they are trying out every game. So here we got a whole lot of problems to get through and a lot of thoughts. So I think about Bedoya, and while his assists are nice, these are flicked on headers from throw-ins and corners. When it comes to the homegrowns, I know, like, we're talking about 2026. I've been so impressed with Frankie Westfield, so I don't just want to ignore that because the team as a whole hasn't been as good. When it comes to the tactics, I will say that I wish that there was more tactical adjustment when things weren't going right. And I'm going to say the first leg against Club America, they went to a 4-2-3-1, and at least the first half. I think they switched it up in the second. And that looked pretty good. It was kind of strange. They went down 1-0. They lost that game 1-0. But all in all, they had chances. It was just a couple scuffed finishes in front of goal. And I don't really know why we didn't see that again. So one of my biggest gripes when it comes to coaches is sometimes coaches think that, they've cracked the code and there's only one way to play. And that tactic that's set up is the one size fits all for every game state. I definitely don't feel that way. I'm a Man United fan. I watched Ruben Amorim trot out the 3-4-3 no matter what was happening, no matter what players were available. And that didn't go super well. I watched Wilfred Nancy go to Celtic in the middle of the season with players that were playing in a back four, try to force them to play in the back three, and it didn't work. So I don't think Bradley Carnell has necessarily been that bad, but it has been disappointing to me that we saw that and we haven't really gone back to it as much, because I think it kind of worked. And I get that they didn't score, but that's been a problem the whole season. So I don't think that necessarily had to do with the formation. And I think even if it's, dropping Milanowski in a little bit in a 4-2-2, that makes sense to me as well. So I do hope that we see a little bit more tactical adjustment. I don't think it's crazy to ask that of Carnell. And considering, the level of striker performance we've seen this season, it would make sense to take one off the field. So, and we can kind of cap this off here with AJ Adejare's comment. It's a reboot that's too hard because we didn't do it sooner. I find this really interesting for a lot of reasons. One being that when Union fans talk about this window and this kind of competitive era, if you will, a lot of times we're talking about 2022. And that team, I think one of the criticisms of that team was, the constant ship of Theseusing that was happening over 2023 and 2024, being the Carranza departure, followed by the Gazdag departure, the Elliott departure, which I don't think was a bad decision for just my 2 cents. But now, after 2025, we see 3 of those players kind of go at once. And, these are players that were not all members of the 2022 team. Only Glezes and Wagner were. But, 3 players that were core starters on the 2025 Shield-winning Union team. And I think one of the criticisms that I hear is that it was too much at once. So it's kind of like, some people wish that they rebuilt sooner after 2022. Some people think that doing this all at once now in 2026 is too much. And I don't know what's better, to be honest, because either way there's going to be a rough year in there. But, after 2022, the Union still kind of gave us some fun competitive seasons. They made some runs in Leagues Cup and CONCACAF, a couple MLS playoff runs. But all in all, I think we can now say that the window from this 2020 to 2026 team has shut. And whether that could have come sooner, I don't know. But one thing I do want you guys to kind of take with you from this is this team is not that great so far this year. I don't think they've necessarily played as bad as the points say and as the standings say, but this is a young team. This is a very young team, and if anything, they're lacking experience. But what that means is a lot of these players are going to improve. They're going to develop. The foreigners are going to become more acclimated to the U.S., and that's going to take time. And I do think it sucks that this was a Shield winning team last year, and they did get rid of 3 of those players. But this is it's going to be a rebuild, and it's going to take time. So I get that they could have done it sooner, but 2025 was a good season. That's a Shield winning year. And when you're winning the Shield in the playoffs, anything can happen. You don't know what's going to happen. So I appreciate the Union's management, and I appreciate the season that they put together. But now this is going to take time. It's definitely going to take time. I want to thank you guys again for the interaction and the feedback on those posts. I think that was a really fun exercise to do to get you guys involved. I always want to stay connected to the pulse of the fan base. This is my first year with the season credentials, so I want to tell you guys kind of what I've been feeling, given a little bit more access to the behind the scenes, being able to talk to the coach, being able to talk to the players. I want to provide you guys with more of this kind of content as the season goes on. So where I'll leave you guys is Nashville tomorrow is going to be a tough game. It's another home game against what, in my opinion, is the best team I've seen in MLS in the last 4 years. And the one positive that the Union can take is that this is in between CONCACAF Champions Cup games for Nashville, and I think that gives them a chance. I think they're definitely going to have an eye on that second leg, and given the success they've had this season, they can afford to rotate heavily. And they've even had success with their rotated lineups. We saw it against Charlotte FC away. Nashville gets 3 points. They don't even play their starters for the whole 90. So it's going to be doable for the Union. But what I want to see in this game is I want to see some more cutting edge in attack. I think I want to see Milan Olaski start up top. I think I want to see minutes for Kevin Sullivan in this game. And I just want to see a little bit more decisiveness on the break. When that ball's turned over, can the Union develop the killer instinct? Can they go to goal? And I know a lot of the issues that we talked about today, the ownership, the front office, the signings, the lack of a designated player, open roster spots, this stuff is not going to, be fixed in one night tomorrow. But the Union have young players, and they're going to take time to develop. And what I'd like to see is take a step in the right direction tomorrow. Get off on the right foot. Start the match well. Keep your focus in stoppage time, early in the match, off kickoffs, late in the match, closing out with the lead. Things like this are, it's the weak point of this team right now. And gaining experience is the best possible thing that these players can do. It's just going to take time. All right, and that's going to conclude our first episode of the Brotherly Game Breakdown. If you guys made it this far in the video, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys a lot. And if you enjoy this kind of stuff, let us know. I'm thinking if this does well, we might try to get some guests in here, maybe turn it into a podcast type deal. I don't really know. I can't see the future, but we'll see. Thank you guys for all your feedback, participating in the little thought exercise therapy session we had. And yeah, thank you very much, and go Union.